So, what is today about? How do we build working class struggle for ecological transformation? How might workplace struggle, feminist struggle, and ecological struggle come together in a world on fire? We're delighted to be joined by Stefania Barca to begin answering these questions. Stefania Barca is an environmental historian and a feminist political ecologist. She's the author of Forces of Reproduction, Notes for a Counter-Hegemonic Anthropocene, and of enclosing water, nature, and political economy in a Mediterranean valley. Most recently, she's released Works of the Earth, which is out with Pluto, which I'd encourage everyone to get. And without further ado, I'll pass to Stefania Barca to speak. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. And let me start by showing you the book cover. I don't know if you can see it because this is the amazing work done by Pluto Press that I really love the cover they chose. And thanks everybody for being here. I will try and give some answers to the questions that Harry posed, but most of all, I will start introducing the book a little bit. And please, Harry, give me a hand up if I go over 15 minutes because I don't want to take too much time. And then, of course, we will. I would rather hear from people in this webinar. Would they, if they have questions or comments, or have a conversation? So, just to introduce the book, let me just tell you that this is a collection of articles that I started writing back in 2010, maybe. It's been a long time research interest of mine to look at how the experience of pollution and environmental contamination and environmental crisis of all kinds have been experienced by workers themselves, because this was something that was really missing in the accounts of the ecological crisis that I was reading about or also hearing about, and this I was interested in kind of looking at this different perspective on the ecological crisis. Everybody just assumed that labor and environment had nothing to do with each other, if not being opposed and in conflict. But mine was not a theoretical position. I was actually inspired by stories that I heard about, that I read about, stories of workers that had actually struggled for environmental regulation and for compensation of environmental damage, of course. And also about how, in some cases, even labor movements, trade union movements had done so in the past. So as a historian, I always thought that the past matters, and the stories that we tell about the past and our past, especially when I say our, I mean the Western world, the industrialized countries. We tend to think that, I mean, we buy into this narrative that the West has made a lot of good things for humanity, and wealth and everything, and that the ecological crisis is just a downside of that, and that only environmental movements and conservation and science are looking at how to remediate, but the workers are not interested in that. So this is a narrative that we all have been socialized into this narrative, right? Of the environmental movement as something much more urban, with middle class, white, and consumerist oriented and stuff. So I was, the more I digged into these different stories, the stories of workers, especially I started with industrial workers, and stories of petrochemical contamination in Italy, for example. That was my starting point, my entry point into this. But the more I read and I looked into this in different contexts, the more I learned about how this story, this narrative was faulty, and how that was a problem. It was a political problem because that reproduced this idea that labor movements had nothing important to do and to say about the ecological crisis. With the passing of time, I became more involved into eco-socialist, the eco-socialist perspective and the eco-socialist movement, the ecofeminist, the Marxist ecofeminist or materialist socialist ecofeminist movement, and I started to gain new perspectives on this whole thing. But basically, that reinforced my idea that, and the idea that I tried to convey in the book, is that it's not consumers or citizens or even scientists that can make an ecological revolution. I mean, as eco-socialists, I believe that only workers can make an ecological revolution, provided that the right conditions are in place and that they achieve unity in struggle. So unity in struggle is my other obsession, has become my obsession more recently, and strategically thinking about how to achieve this unity in worker struggles towards an ecological revolution. Yeah, and also the other obsession has been also thanks to my encountering with the wages for housework movement, with the global women's strike, what it called today, and a long term. I didn't know they had a long term history. I thought the campaign was something from back the 70s, and it was only about women and domestic work. But then I learned that they have 5 decades of struggles, and that these struggles are not exactly restricted to domestic work per se, but they have a much broader meaning. So much so that recently, in 2019, I came to work with Selma James and Nina Lopez. Together, we were working on a policy document called Blueprint for Europe's Just Transition. There was an attempt, failed, I should say, failed, but still an attempt at putting together a vision for a Green New Deal in Europe that was alternative to the Green Deal of the European Commission. So we were trying to put together a plan based on principles of environmental justice and global climate justice, and also based on feminist approach in which unwaged work and domestic work and care work more generally was central to the just transition, to the ecological transition. So that was also an eye-opening work for me, that also led me to go back to my research and look for how domestic work and subsistence work and care work more broadly had also been part of the struggle of workers against ecological and climate crisis. And so that's how I came across these stories that are told in the book. One is, or I came to reinterpret stories that I already knew, on how women in working class communities, like the community of Manfredonia in Italy, which is told in chapter 2, or the women in the wages per housework movement of Bristol back in the 80s, and they had struggled against industrial hazards. And also in the case of Bristol, there was part of the anti-nuclear energy movement. And in the case of Manfredonia, was about environmental justice, recognition of the biological damage done by the petrochemical industry. And I came to realize these were worker struggles, not just women's struggles, no, because this category women doesn't really resonate with an eco-socialist perspective. That was the struggle, that those were struggles of domestic workers, basically. People that unwaged domestic workers, subsistence workers. Yeah, talking about subsistence workers, I came across the story in the Amazon forest, the story of the extractivist movement, as they call themselves, which is, of course, a different meaning of the term extractivism. It's not mineral extraction for or extraction of resources for profit, but it is a form of extracting from nature what is needed for human subsistence and for human development and autonomy of these communities. So those was a story that I came across through a former PhD student, Brazilian PhD student who came to work with me when I was in Portugal, and he brought the story with him of how these people had been struggling for and winning their struggle, and getting a new form of conservation from the government, a new form of conservation that was actually based on their role as caretakers of the forest and centered on their perspective. So for me, that was a very positive and hopeful story that told me that workers' struggles, even when they are not particularly supported by the trade unions or whatever, but they are still workers' struggles. Also, this story started with a trade union, actually. It started with the union of the seringueiros, the rubber tappers of the Amazon forest. So, it was the result of an alliance between the seringueiros and the indigenous movement. So that was also a very important lesson, that these kind of alliances, they give strength to worker struggles, and they are really important also to liberate the labor movement from its let's say its obsession with the with industry, with everything industrial. Not because we don't need industry, we don't need industrial workers. What we need is alliances across different kinds of work that are all they all have their role to play in the ecological struggle. So the fact that that struggle was successful made me think that that is something that we should learn from, even though clearly we cannot apply mechanically, no, one story to other contexts, to different periods and different places. So the challenge here is to try and look at our own struggles and our own context, and learn what can be useful, what can be understood, what can be brought into our own struggles from those that were done in the past, especially when they were successful. Well, so what else? Well, in the first part of the book, I tell the stories, no? The story of Mount Fredonia, the story of Bristol, the story of the Amazon, and other stories. And then in the second part of the book, I do kind of a critique of the way in which the just transition, labor's just transition discourse and strategy is being developed in the past, over the past decade, I would say, to the point of becoming, I mean, just transition started as a keyword in the labor movement, especially from industrial trade unions. But then it kind of became institutionalized, co-opted. Now it's all over the place. It's in the European Union framework. Everybody, the UN, everybody talks about just transition. But then the problem is what I mean by this term. So, we have two problems. One is how institutions co-opt the term and how they use it in a way that is not really consistent with a just transition, with an ecological transition that is socially just. But the other problem is also how the labor movement itself has come to develop it in a kind of restricted sense, no? Understanding it just as a way of compensating industrial workers for the loss of certain kinds of jobs. Training workers for the new green economy and what have you. But this is a very restricted understanding and not very transformative. I don't see any revolutionary potential in this kind of just transition understanding. Even though I'm not, at the same time, I'm not discarding it. I think the point is not to discard the just transition. The point is to reclaim it, no, and fill it in with more political potential. But the just transition has potential to respond to real needs of workers and working class people in the transition. It just needs to be expanded, and it needs to be radicalized. And by expanded, I mean, first of all, to extend the vision of the labor subject as something more than industrial jobs, even something more larger than commodity production. Of course, workers in production of commodities, they have power. They have certain kinds of power in making trouble, let's say, to the system. But they're not the only ones. We need to extend just transition to unwaged workers, and so subsistence workers like the extractivistas in the Amazon. And not only the Amazon, there are similar movements in lots of rural areas. So this is another point, extending the vision of just transition to the rural world. Let's not forget that 50% of the world population is rural. So cities are not the only place. And the rural world is essential also to the development of global capitalism, because the rural world is the place where that capital looks at as to extract resources and all kinds of the resources that capitalism needs, to not only to make profit, but also to make the ecological transition. For example, the rare earth materials that are needed to do that, for capital to green itself. And also, capital looks at the rural world as a sink for the waste and for what is the end pipe of the production process. So the rural world it's really essential to capitalist development, and we really need to be aware of this and be aware also of the struggles of rural people. And not only in food production, but also in the forests, on the oceans, in the fisheries, in all kinds of rural production sites, but also rural communities and their struggles for keeping the autonomy over their territories. So territorial struggle that also are key in this ecological transition. So I think that subsistence work, broadly speaking, also care work, broadly speaking, which is not just care work, is broader than domestic work. There is a lot of care work that is waged as well, and the just transition strategy does not currently, in its current formulation, does not take into account the waged care workers that are more and more important in the economy, and to the point that now there is a lot of talk about the care economy and all that. So we need also the just transition to organize care workers as ecological subjects, because of course care work has a lot to do. Not only caring for the people also has a lot to do, because it matters where governments put their money. No, if they put their money, all their money in the industrial sectors, and they defund the caring sector, that matters a lot to also not only to the workers but also to all of us and to our working class people who are depending on public care services. And that is also relevant to the ecological transition, because of course care work is much less carbon intensive than other kinds of jobs. So this resonates a little with the slogan "Invest in Caring, Not Killing," again from the Wages for Housework. But also the caring work that's also spent on the land, in the territories, in local landscapes by people again in the rural world, but also in the urban environment. Like, for example, I'm thinking of again the environmental justice movement and people in marginalized urban communities who struggle against incinerators or polluting infrastructures, and they oppose, not like resist the expansion of this system, and they claim their right to a healthy and safe and healthy environment. So I see those also as forms of caring work, unwaged, of course, but still very important. And so I guess my message with this book is that we need to try and keep all these different kinds of workers together into a unified vision of the struggle. Even though they are different, they have different, and they must maintain their autonomy as different organized sectors. So I'm not proposing here to go back to some kind of Leninist vision, but I'm talking about something more, perhaps more difficult, which is building, organizing together different sectors of the workers of the earth.